Before we head to the garden, I'd like to thank Squarespace for sponsoring today's YouTube video. Squarespace is for creatives like you and me ready to put their ideas out into the world. Here's what makes it so awesome. They make it easy to buy a domain, very user-friendly. They make it easy to gather email addresses for your mailing list to stay in touch with visitors, and offer a members-only area for your website. If you've been holding yourself back creatively and are ready to unleash your project onto the world, visit squarespace.com/Elliott Homestead and use the code Elliott Homestead to get started.
Good morning, YouTube. It's Shaye from the Elliott Homestead here. We have a lot to do on the farm, and so many of you were interested in the no-dig market garden that we put in and showed you last week that we thought we would bring you along as we finish it off and completely finish it off. We're going to try, at least. But before we head up to the market garden, I have some pepper transplants here that I need to pot on, as Charles Dowding would say, and get them into some cell packs so that they can, grow happily. So I thought we'd head to the greenhouse, see how things are growing in there, and then actually take some of those seedlings that we planted together a couple weeks ago up to the new market garden so that when we finish it, we can get those planted. Let's go. Things are really growing like crazy in here right now as the days get longer and they get a lot warmer here in our zone 7B. So you can see a lot of what we have planted together is sprouting and growing really beautifully. I'll make sure to tag a video in the show notes below this one to show you how we planted things this year. We're doing things a little bit different, and I have to say, so far, so good. So some of these cold weather crops, things like peas, kale, collard greens, radishes, turnips, all of these things can actually be transplanted out now into the market garden. We went to a lot of effort this last week to get rid of all of our rogue chickens that were scratching up my gardens. And so it should be safe enough now to move really almost all of these out into the market garden. The only things that will stay behind are things that are a little too immature to plant out yet. And then, of course, our hot weather crops like our peppers and our tomatoes and our eggplants. So if you remember from our video a couple weeks ago, we kind of densely planted seedlings, and then we will pick them out and pot them on into some of these cell trays here. That way we can make sure that we only transplant seeds that have been germinated, nice strong plants that we can move on to the garden. And that's what we did with our peppers too. So here are some lettuces that are ready to be plucked out and put into a cell tray. I've got quite a few lettuces over here that are ready for that. But that's also what we did with our pepper plants, and that's what we need to transplant on this morning. Some seeds are easier to transplant and move on than others. These were snapdragons, which if you're familiar at all with snapdragon seeds, they're like dust. They're a little flake of dust. So these ones I germinated in one of these great little packs here, plucked out the ones that had germinated and that were nice and strong, and then potted them on into this little cell tray. But they're a tiny hair of a plant, so that one took a lot of time. Move that aside. Peppers are one of those crops that are a little bit of a labor of love. So they've gone through their first stage, which is germination, and now they're going to go on to their second stage, which is potting them on into this 72 cell plug tray. And then once they've sort of maxed out their space in there, I will actually move them on to these little 4x4 plastic containers. And then they'll happily live in here until probably mid or end of May, when it's really nice and warm here and there's no risk of frost. So you kind of have to love the process of growing peppers. Same goes for tomatoes. As much as I love just being in the greenhouse and taking care of the seedlings and planting them, that's really not what I can get bogged down in today, because I have to get the rock and the bark finished up in the market garden. We're so close. So we're gonna make it a family affair. We're all gonna try to pitch in and get it finished up. So I'm just gonna pop these peppers on quick as I can so that we can get up and actually start the work that needs to be done.
Where are we going?
So I may have been a little bit optimistic about actually finishing the market garden on this day, because what that means is hauling in rock to edge all the beds. I've been getting some questions about why we were edging the beds in rock, if this had something to do with the no-dig method or if it somehow supported the beds. Not really. Aesthetically, I really wanted there to be a line between the pathways and the garden beds, because this just allows my mind to rest a bit. It gives it something to focus on, and it gives me an edge to keep clean from weeds. And so the rock was purely an aesthetic thing that I wanted to bring in. We get this rock from a neighbor of ours who just digs it out of his hillside. So he was kind enough to bring us a couple loads of it. And it's a ton of work because it's a really heavy basalt. Just means a lot of carrying and a lot of straining. In fact, this entire garden has just been so much physical labor, from shoveling the bark to shoveling the compost to laying down the rock beds. Reality is, probably not going to get this finished for a few more weeks. So what I've been doing is just taking it a couple of beds at a time and then transplanting the plants into those beds, and then slowly moving a little bit further down the row and a little bit further down the row every time I have some time to get out there and do that heavy lifting. The cardboard that we showed in last week's No Dig video about how we set these beds up, that's also underneath these pathways here. So the bark will eventually break down and mush into the ground, but the idea is that in that time, it will have suppressed the weeds, and as long as we keep a nice thick layer of bark on it all the time, it should be able to stay that way. So all that's left to do now in the beds that are done is to transplant on those seedlings that have been growing in the greenhouse for a few weeks, get them watered in, and get them well on their way to growing. You'll notice that I'm planting directly into the compost here, and that's totally fine. But this compost has also been sitting on my property since wintertime, so it's been here for probably 4 or 5 months already. So if there was any residual heat, meaning it's just too rich in nitrogen to be able to plant in directly, it'll just burn the plants, that would have faded away long ago. So this is a nice compost that's completely finished breaking down, and it's ready for planting in directly. If your compost pile is still steaming and it still smells really strong, you can feel the warmth of it on your face when you scoop it out and hold it up to smell it, then you're going to need to give it a little bit more time to finish composting before you plant directly in it. Otherwise, your plants will burn. Your compost should smell like a nice, rich soil and nothing else. We have to irrigate all of our garden beds here in north central Washington because it's so dry. But luckily in the spring, because it's not too hot yet, we can just get away with watering it in from a watering can a few times a week. And then when it gets a little warmer, we'll actually lay out some drip tubing so that these can stay watered all summer long.